for so many of us, when we want to wake up in the morning with a sense of energy, with a sense of like motivation and excitement for our day, we're not doing anything in the morning to support that.
Food obviously has a very big effect on our blood sugar, but stress does as well.
There are other supplements like specific probiotics that you can take that can really help to support weight management. Welcome to Genestra Brands Gut Check, a 6-episode series where we teach you everything you need to know about understanding your gut health. In a world of health fads, quick fixes, and information overload, we want to simplify, educate, and empower Canadians about the vital role of gut health and overall wellness. In partnership with 2 renowned healthcare practitioners, Bisleen Attli, Naturopathic Doctor, Clinical Director, and TEDx Speaker, and Carley Nadine McConkey, Holistic Nutritionist, this series aims to dispel the myths and complexities surrounding gut health, offering reliable and scientifically backed information. Follow us on Instagram at Genestra Brands CA for more. Now let's dive in.
Gut health definitely influences insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism. So essentially that's our blood sugar. Insulin resistance is something that a lot of people are confused about. And essentially what that is when your body has glucose in the system, what your pancreas does, it releases insulin into the body, and insulin almost knocks on the door of the cell and allows glucose into the cell. But what happens is when we have too much glucose and insulin isn't actually properly, it's being flooded, but it's not actually, allowing the glucose into the cell, we have so much insulin that it becomes resistant and we're not able to actually intake that glucose and use it properly.
And it's just such a big underlying piece that people don't understand the importance of, because if you're insulin resistant, similar to your gut, it just wreaks havoc everywhere in your body because you have insulin receptors everywhere, because glucose is our primary source of energy, of fuel.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note too that even when getting blood work done, a lot of the time we just look at fasting glucose, which is fine. It can give us a part of that to look at, but I think getting getting your insulin tested, fasting insulin is key, because it really does give us a really deeper look into where your insulin is at. And the health of our gut definitely does have a big part to play in our hunger cues. So we have hormones called leptin and ghrelin. So essentially ghrelin is the hormone that makes us feel hungry. I like thinking of our stomach making like a grr sound. It's a great way to remember ghrelin. And then leptin is essentially the hormone that is really important for helping us feel satiated. And this also is really, really impacted too with melatonin, right? It's all very, very much connected.
Yeah, everything's connected.
Absolutely. And then when it comes to blood sugar, I think that there's a misconception that we want to constantly have this like low blood sugar, and that's not what we're working on, right? Because the thing is with blood sugar is that we want this like really beautiful ebb and flow. That's going to keep our energy up. It's going to help us feeling our best. The thing that we don't want is this like very high skyrocket blood sugar increase and then the drop, right?
Yeah, it's huge, and people don't really see that link between blood sugar and cravings. And the other piece that I find that people miss out on is just not realizing that certain types of bacteria overgrowing in your gut can actually lead you to have more cravings. So I actually was talking to one of my patients a week ago, and she is going to start a gut reset with me at end of September. And I was taking her through something called the low FODMAP diet. So when we look at the low FODMAP diet, what this diet is that you're essentially cutting out these highly fermentable foods that can essentially feed some of that unhealthy bacteria in your gut. And the whole goal is that when you cut out these foods and do a bit of a gut reset, you're kind of killing off that unhealthy bacteria and repopulating your gut with the healthier bacteria. And as we were going through the low FODMAP diet, because I was just, kind of getting her feet warmed up for what she was going to enter end of September, we went through it and she was like, oh my God, I crave all these foods. So she was craving some of those highly fermentable foods like soy, taro, chickpeas, chia seeds. And she's like, I literally have cravings for these foods. And I'm like, is it you craving it? Or is it your gut bacteria? Like something's happening in there.
Yeah. And then when it comes to blood sugar as well, something I like to use as an example, there's food obviously has a very big effect on our blood sugar, but stress does as well. Some women will wake up and the first thing they do is grab a cup of coffee, sometimes with some oat milk, and they'll drink that on an empty stomach. And what that does is it spikes their blood sugar. Then they get kind of stressed out, and that's just how they start their day. So that's like setting yourself up for the day, right? So a great way to reduce this, and I recommend this as a great tip, is to start with a protein-rich breakfast. So for women that are in their menstruating years, this can be a great tip. So instead of reaching for that oat milk latte, or instead of reaching for, coffee first thing in the morning, or fasting first thing in the morning, I recommend trying eating a little bit of like a protein-rich, savory breakfast. This can really set up a lot of women. It could be a game changer.
I completely agree with that, and I have such a bone to pick with fasting.
Yes,
I have this conversation all the time, especially because I do so much work in brain health. And really, when you look at the short-term studies when it comes to fasting, the short-term effect of fasting isn't great. Like, you do feel more irritable, you do feel more anxious, you do feel more stressed out. And what I always educate my patients is that, number one, when you wake up in the morning, your cortisol hormone is the highest. So whenever I tell my patients to go test their cortisol, I tell them to go around 8 a.m. because that's when it's the highest. So we want to test that at that time for the optimal levels. And it's the highest in the morning because that's what your body uses to help you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, it gives you that boost of energy that you need.
So one, your cortisol is naturally going to be higher in the morning. Now, number two, we're all waking up and no one is going to go roll in a meadow and have this happy, beautiful day of doing whatever they want.
It'd be nice.
I can be nice, right? But we're usually waking up to really high stress lives. We have a billion things that we need to do. So we're waking up to this really high stress life. Then number three, what do we reach for first thing in the morning? Coffee. And what does coffee do? Coffee increases your cortisol, right? So you have this like beautiful stress sandwich in the morning. And now what's the fourth thing that you're adding to that? Fasting. And fasting short term initially does increase your cortisol levels. And I'm not at all against fasting, but for so many of us, when we want to wake up in the morning with a sense of energy, with a sense of like motivation and excitement for our day, we're not doing anything in the morning to support that. Also, can we talk about like breakfast foods? Because that's the other issue too, is just like, and this plays such a big role even just with our gut health and what we're feeding our gut and our body, is that, we have been conditioned and led to believe that breakfast food needs to be cereal, it needs to be oatmeal
with maple syrup,
it needs to be pancakes, all of that stuff. And it's just like, no, that's actually the worst thing to have in the morning, because you're starting your day off with a huge blood sugar spike.
100%.
I literally encourage my patients to have dinner for breakfast, because usually we end up making dinner be your healthiest meal, but it's like, no, breakfast should be your healthiest meal.
Absolutely. And I think it's just all about this journey, right, of getting to know, maybe questioning of why we do certain things. Like, have we been, just so accustomed to this through society and through just like what we've been taught. So just changing it up. I love doing that. You mentioned that, like having like dinner foods for breakfast. Sometimes I'll make a giant batch of like bone broth chicken soup, and I could have that for breakfast. Or like doing eggs with a little bit of smoked salmon. Be so surprised of how much your metabolism starts working. You become more, your brain fog starts to dissipate. You have more energy. It's pretty amazing. So, if someone's having an acute craving for something, right in the moment, I would say my top tip would be a little bit of apple cider vinegar. So it's really interesting in traditional Chinese medicine, if you are craving something sweet, on the opposite spectrum is something sour. So if you have something like apple cider vinegar, it can really cut that craving. And so I would say just a little bit of apple cider vinegar in some water, and taking that can really, really help with cravings like right away. Another amazing tip that I love and I use myself is about a teaspoon of beef tallow with a little bit of raw honey and sea salt. It tastes really good, and it can be a really great way of incorporating like a healthy fat to like really cut that craving. And if your blood sugar is feeling really low, you can use that. But I really love that tip. I think it can be really helpful.
Those are great tips. I find apple cider vinegar honestly works really well. I have a bit of a mental emotional tip here. Oftentimes when we get cravings, so much of it is associated with stress and other emotions that are coming up. So even just taking a step back, like by all means, go get the ice cream, eat the cookie, but just take a step back and ask yourself, like, what is actually happening to you? right? And where is this craving coming from? And is there some underlying emotion or stress that you actually need to address in this moment? And then by all means, go indulge in that craving. But just taking a step back to tune in can really help. I also find sometimes just getting up and changing your physical state by just going on a walk and moving your body can make it easier for you to shift that emotional state. So some of these tips help too. And then lastly, if you're really craving hard and you don't want to eat something sugary or junky, opting for something that's higher in fat, right? So opting for that nuts or seeds. Sometimes I'll just take a tablespoon of peanut butter and have it instead, because that healthy fat just really feeds into that hunger more, and helps you feel more full, and it doesn't cause that big blood sugar spike. And sometimes we just want something to put in our mouth and eat.
Absolutely. And I really love that you brought up that mental thing and checking in with yourself. What a really beautiful opportunity to be able to connect with yourself. Am I actually truly hungry, or am I thirsty emotionally? Like, do I feel lonely? Do I feel isolated? How can I support myself best right now? So I really love that you talked about that. Yeah, so I would say that what we were talking about, having that high protein breakfast, making sure that you have a meal with protein, fat, and fiber. So lots of leafy greens, veggies, and then like quality protein from meat, and then, or some really great whole plant-based proteins. So protein, fat, and fiber are really, really important. And having a little bit of apple cider vinegar before a meal can reduce blood sugar spikes significantly. It's actually been shown. So I like to put a little bit in some water before I have a meal. It can be really, really helpful for regulating blood sugar throughout the day.
Yeah, that makes honestly such a big difference. And especially that protein piece, I find everybody's missing out on protein and getting enough of it. Again, especially when it comes to like breakfast, people have 2 eggs, but when you look at the protein in 2 eggs, it's like 12 grams of protein. And you really need to be getting at least a minimum of 25 to 30 grams of protein with a meal to set up a really good foundation for the rest of the day. And then healthy fats is also a big one I find is missing from people's diet. So getting those healthy fish like the salmon, the mackerel, the anchovies. Sardines as well. You love your sardines.
I do like my sardines.
And then even like the avocados, the nuts and seeds, and all of that stuff, because these are the foods that actually help you feel full. And a big one too is, right, like we shouldn't be eating all day long at all. Because every time you put food in your mouth, it starts that blood sugar pathway and cascade. And really we should be aiming to have 2 to 3 meals a day, and really avoiding snacking in between to support healthy blood sugar levels. And if you find yourself craving food between meals, it's probably because you're not getting enough protein and healthy fat.
Absolutely. Another great tip that I recommend to people as well is just going for a nice walk after dinner or after a meal can reduce blood sugar spikes and cravings significantly later through the day.